Ladies and gentlemen, you feel like your world just collapsed, don't you? Like your chest is physically heavier, and no matter how much you sleep, eat, or talk to others, there's this constant ache that doesn't go away. That's heartbreak, raw, relentless, and unforgiving. But here's something most people won't tell you. What feels permanent right now is actually a storm passing through. It's not your new normal, it's your emotional weather. And just like any storm, this too has an expiration date, even if it doesn't feel like it in this moment. Let me ask you this: how many times in life have you said, "I'll never get over this," only to wake up weeks, months, or even years later realizing you did? Your body, your brain, your heart, they're all wired to heal, even when you're not consciously trying. But during heartbreak, our brain starts lying to us. It tells us this pain is forever, that no one will ever love us like they did, that this was our last chance, that we'll never feel excitement, passion, or connection again. But those are just fear-based thoughts, not facts, and they're loudest in the middle of grief. Here's something powerful to remember: emotions are like waves. They rise, they crash, and then they fade. No emotion, not even the deepest heartbreak, stays at the same intensity forever. But you've got to let yourself feel it. You can't numb it, rush through it, or fake your way out of it. You can cry, you can scream into your pillow, you can walk around aimlessly replaying memories. That's okay, but while you're doing that, hold on to one undeniable truth: this is temporary. You will not always feel like this. People often confuse intensity with permanence. Just because it hurts a lot doesn't mean it will last forever. Think about a physical wound. The worst part is when it first happens. It stings, it bleeds, it shocks your system. But your body gets to work immediately. Underneath the pain, healing begins almost instantly. Emotional pain works the same way. Even if you can't see it, there are parts of you already patching up, already adapting, already learning. That's what makes you human. That's what makes you strong. You're not weak for being in pain. You're not dramatic for missing someone who left. And you're certainly not foolish for having loved deeply. In fact, the more it hurts, the more it proves you were brave enough to give your heart fully. That's not something to be ashamed of, that's something to be proud of. Most people never love like that. So even though it feels like the ache will never go away, you need to remind yourself that your heart is not broken, it's bruised, and bruises heal. Not overnight, not without some discomfort, but they do fade. The lightness returns, the laughter comes back. The version of you that feels unreachable right now isn't gone, they're just underneath the rubble, waiting for you to clear the space to rise again. They might have taken your time, your attention, your plans, even your energy, but they did not take your future. And no matter how tightly you once held on to them, no matter how deeply you saw them woven into every piece of what you thought tomorrow would look like, their absence doesn't get to define what's still ahead of you. It feels like you lost everything, but what you really lost was a version of the future that included someone who couldn't hold space for the real you. That isn't your forever. That was just your now. And now, you get to rewrite everything. Here's something you need to tattoo on your heart. They left, but your life didn't. You're still breathing. You're still waking up every day with opportunity in front of you. There are still people who haven't met you yet that will love you in ways you can't even comprehend. There are still days coming that will feel light again. There are conversations waiting for you that will remind you how deeply seen and understood you deserve to feel. But none of that can begin while you're still defining your worth by the one who walked away. We make a mistake when we believe our life stops moving just because someone else decided to leave. But the truth is, they didn't pause your potential. They didn't put a ceiling on your happiness. They didn't get to take the parts of you that matter most. What they took was proximity, that's all, and proximity is not purpose. You still have purpose even in this heartbreak. You still have options. You still have a path that belongs entirely to you. Think about all the ways you've shown up in love. The late night calls, the support, the emotional availability, the little things you did to make their life easier. Those weren't just acts of love. They were reflections of your character. Just because they didn't recognize your value doesn't mean your value disappeared. It means they weren't the one capable of receiving it. And that's not your failure. That's their limitation. You're not broken. You're being redirected. That relationship didn't end because you weren't enough. It ended because it had served its time in your story. Some people are chapters, not conclusions. And when you stop tying your future to a person who was never built to carry it with you, you realize how much lighter it is to walk alone for a while than to drag dead weight. You may feel like they left you empty, but that emptiness is actually space. Space for you to fill with truth. Space for you to pour into dreams you put on hold. Space for you to rediscover the parts of yourself that went quiet in that relationship. They took some memories, maybe even some plans, but they can't take your vision. They don't own your second chance. They aren't you think you're heartbroken because you miss them, but what you're really mourning is the story you thought you were going to live. That imagined future, the one where they stayed, where you built a life together, where the connection only got deeper, is what's breaking your heart. You didn't just lose a person, you lost a vision, and that loss hits harder because it was never real in the first place. It was potential. It was the what could have been. And grieving potential can sometimes hurt more than grieving reality because it feels like the universe snatched something away before it had the chance to even exist. Let's be honest, you weren't just invested in the person. You were invested in the plan. The holidays spent together. The trips you never got to take. The family gatherings they were supposed to attend. The way you saw them next to you in every milestone. That's why the silence feels so loud now, because it echoes all those unspoken dreams. You filled in the future with their name, their face, their role. And when they walked away, it wasn't just a breakup. It was the collapse of a whole mental movie you had already been directing, scene by scene, moment by moment. This is what makes heartbreak complicated. You're not just missing their presence. You're also tangled in the emotional energy you poured into the fantasy. You saw a forever. They were a part of your blueprint, and it's hard to let go of that kind of attachment when it was built on hope. Hope is sticky. It clings. Even when reality contradicts it, hope will whisper, but maybe, and keep you stuck. But it's time to recognize that just because you hoped for something doesn't mean it was ever going to happen the way you imagined. Here's a question to ask yourself. Were you in love with who they were, or who you thought they could be? There's a difference. Sometimes we're not attached to a person. We're attached to a role we wanted them to play. And when someone shows you they're not capable of showing up in that role, it doesn't mean the role is wrong. It just means they weren't the right one for it. Your vision wasn't the problem. Your standards weren't the problem. The problem was that you cast someone in a part they weren't qualified for, and now the scene has shifted. You're grieving a version of them that never fully existed, and that's hard to admit, because that version, the sweet, consistent, loyal version, you saw glimpses of it, and those glimpses felt real enough to make you believe the whole dream was possible. But a flash of something is not the same as a foundation, and a highlight reel does not equal a whole relationship. What hurts is realizing you were holding on to the best moments, not the full truth. That ache you feel, it's the letting go of a fantasy that felt safe. It's the release of a timeline you carefully crafted in your heart. It's the mourning of a narrative that helped you feel like your love had direction. And while that narrative is gone, what remains is your ability to write a new one, with someone who fits into the story not because you imagined them there, but because they choose to stay, page after page, without needing to be convinced something you get from them. It's something you give to yourself. That's the hardest part to accept because your heart still believes that if they just gave you the missing piece, you'd finally feel peace. But that missing piece, it's not their words, it's your acceptance. You're holding your breath for a text, a call, an apology that validates your pain. You think if they just acknowledged how much they hurt you, If they just admitted they gave up too easily or that they still care, then the weight in your chest would finally lift. But you need to ask yourself, what if that message never comes? What if they're already moving on while you're stuck in limbo waiting for permission to let go? The longer you wait for them to do the emotional labor, the longer you give them power over your healing. Closure isn't a grand finale. It's not a perfectly wrapped explanation. It's not even about justice. It's about reclaiming your power when someone left you with confusion, silence, or half-truths. Because sometimes the reason they didn't give you closure is because they didn't have the emotional maturity to do so. Sometimes people disappear, not because they didn't feel something, but because they didn't know how to deal with what they felt. And you can't build your peace on someone else's emotional limitations. Let this sink in. You don't need their clarity to move forward. You don't need their permission to stop hurting. You don't need their side of the story to know how deeply you were affected. If it ended in silence, if it ended in betrayal, if it ended with them ghosting or running away instead of facing hard conversations, that is your answer. Their actions were the closure. You just don't like what those actions said. But that doesn't make them less true. It just makes them harder to accept. We romanticize the idea that a heartfelt conversation can heal us, that if we just knew why, we'd stop hurting. But most of the time, even if they told you the truth, it wouldn't erase the pain. In fact, it might hurt more, because the truth is rarely what you hoped it would be. It's often messy, selfish, complicated, and sometimes completely disconnected from your worth. So why give them the power to define your healing, your timeline, your understanding of your own story? You get to decide that you're done replaying the past like it's a mystery you still need to solve. You get to walk away without every question answered, because not every question needs an answer to be irrelevant. The peace you're searching for, it begins the moment you stop asking them for it. The moment you look at the silence and say, "This is enough for me to choose myself now." Closure isn't their job. It's your responsibility, and more importantly, you're right. You're sitting in your pain wondering how to make it stop, how to fast forward through this chapter of your life that feels unbearable. But what you haven't realized yet is that this pain, this raw soul-cracking heartbreak, is actually holding the key to your next level. You can use this pain, you can harness it, because heartbreak is not just suffering. It's energy, and energy, when redirected, becomes power. When your world falls apart, you're handed a choice: stay buried in the rubble or build something unshakable from the pieces. The pain you're feeling now is fuel if you dare to burn it. People talk about glow-ups like they come from changing your look or hitting the gym. But the most powerful glow-up, the one that no one can take from you, it's the internal one that comes after you've been broken and decide to rebuild yourself differently, not for them, not to make them regret losing you, but for you, because heartbreak brings you face to face with the version of yourself that you've ignored, the version that's been waiting in the shadows, asking for more boundaries, more purpose, more self-respect. You don't get access to that version without pain, and that's why this season hurts so much. It's not just about loss, it's about awakening. Right now, your energy feels like grief, like anger, like regret. But that same energy, when channeled, becomes transformation. This is your opportunity to take all of that love you gave someone else and pour it back into yourself, to show up for yourself in the way they didn't, to become your own closure, your own healing, your own protection. That doesn't mean pretending you're fine or rushing into distractions. It means sitting in the discomfort long enough to ask, what is this pain trying to teach me? Because buried inside it is the roadmap to your comeback. Pain doesn't show up to punish you. It shows up to reveal you, to pull back the curtain on what you've tolerated, what you've accepted, and what you've forgotten about yourself in the process of loving someone who didn't stay. There's gold in that wreckage. Lessons, insights, clarity. You now know what red flags feel like, what emotional inconsistency looks like, what happens when you betray your own intuition just to keep someone in your life. That wisdom, it's priceless, and it only comes when you've risked your heart and had to find your way back to yourself. The strongest people aren't the ones who never get hurt. They're the ones who learn how to turn pain into power, who use heartbreak as a catalyst instead of a curse, who walk away from the fire, not burned but refined. You have a choice. Let this define you as someone broken, or let it elevate you into someone unbreakable. The difference between the two isn't the pain, it's what you do with it. You can write your next chapter with tears in your eyes and strength in your spine. You can turn heartbreak into hunger. You can decide that this moment doesn't end you, it builds you. There's a moment after heartbreak where you realize something deeper than the pain. You realize that healing is not about forgetting them, it's about remembering you. Because somewhere along the way, while you were trying to be enough, trying to hold things together, trying to earn love that should have been freely given, you began shrinking yourself. You made room for someone who was never making space for you. You twisted your energy, your time, your boundaries, all in the hope that loving harder would finally make it work. But love should never require that much self-abandonment. Healing isn't just about moving on from them, it's about returning to yourself. You want to know when you'll finally feel peace. It's the moment you stop obsessing over what they're doing, who they're with, whether they regret leaving, and start asking yourself, what do I want? What do I deserve? Who am I when I'm not performing for someone else's attention? Because you didn't lose love. You lost the version of yourself who was settling. You lost the version who thought crumbs were a meal, who thought being chosen sometimes was better than being loved fully. And that's a version worth shedding. That's growth. That's rebirth. This heartbreak is the perfect invitation to get intimate with yourself again, to rediscover the things that light you up, not because they impress anyone, not because they help you move on faster, but because they reconnect you to your own soul, the hobbies you dropped, the friendships you neglected, the dreams you shelved because you were too busy prioritizing someone who wouldn't prioritize you back. It's time to reintroduce yourself to those parts. You're not just healing from a breakup. You're healing from the ways you disappeared inside that relationship. You're calling yourself home. There's a quiet power that comes when you realize your life no longer but someone else's presence, that your happiness no longer hangs on a message, a memory, a maybe. That you can wake up, look in the mirror and feel whole. Not because someone is loving you, but because you are finally loving you. That's when the pain shifts. That's when the weight lifts. Not because you forgot them, but because you remembered your own worth in such a loud, undeniable way that their absence starts to feel irrelevant. This kind of healing isn't flashy. It's not always Instagram worthy. It's silent mornings, it's making your bed, it's saying no to things that drain you, it's forgiving yourself for not walking away sooner, it's catching yourself mid-thought and choosing not to check their profile. It's setting a new standard, it's writing your own closure, speaking your own affirmation, becoming your own home. Every time you choose yourself in the small moments, you're rewriting your identity. You're building a life so grounded in self-respect that you'll never again beg for a love that costs you your dignity. You are not what they walked away from. You are what you're walking towards. That peace you keep searching for, it's not waiting at the end of someone else's apology or the start of a new relationship. It's already inside you. It always was. You just needed the silence, the solitude, the space to finally hear your own voice again. Healing is not about replacing them, it's about reclaiming you.